Going to be continuing with my replay of the 7 Years' War, and we'll begin with the next turn. So we're continuing with 7 Years' War from Strategy and Tactics number 163. And we are now on turn 2. It's 1756 in the fall. So we start with the historical events phase, and we roll on the table and we get the result, Prussian glory. So the Prussian player decides to make Russia neutral. So Russia's no longer part of the coalition. And then during the diplomatic segment, the Prussian decides to go into diplomatic conflict with Russia. And this turns out very well for Frederick. And Russia decides to join the Prussians in a coalition along with Britain and Hanover. Now, Austria tries to break that alliance during the diplomatic segment, but this fails with the result diplomatic incident. So this moves the balance of power to 0. This is still neutral. Now we go into the combat segments, and Frederick is going to continue his siege of Prague. He'll be using the siege table, and this time the fortress capitulates. So that moves the balance of power index in favor of Prussia, and so it drops to -2. This is still neutral, though. Next, General Seydlitz tries to get his troops to move. And in this game, to move, you need to use the march table, and he suffers a no march result. So he's going to be stuck on the river near Kornogratz, as is pictured here. Next, we go to turn 3. This is the winter of 1756. So we use the events table, and the result is diplomatic revolution. Now, I'm not exactly sure what that means historically, but in this case, the side with the most diplomatic points has to lose. So the Prussians lose a diplomatic point, which is picked up by the Austrian player. Since this is a winter turn, there are a lot of difficulties that can be encountered. So there'll be less activity. There's more penalties because it's winter. So Austria obviously needs to rebuild after losing Prague. And General Seydlitz tries to move again, fails on the march table, so he's stuck and has to winter in the villages around Brunn. He doesn't lose any men to attrition, so that's on the positive side. Now we're on to the spring of 1757. We roll on the event table, and this time there's no event. Then we go to diplomatic conflict. The Prussians attempt conflict with Saxony, which has no result. Then the Austrian coalition also aims at diplomacy at the Saxons, and this time it's successful, and Saxony joins the coalition. As a result, Frederick the Great abandons Prague because he senses a threat now from the Saxons. So Prussian troops march into Silesia. Then Russians under Apraxin march through Poland toward Moravia. Ferdinand moves his army of Hanover to Wittenberg, and he besieges the Saxons. The Russian army suffers attrition from its march. Ferdinand manages a breach at Wittenberg, and then that fortress finally surrenders. Meanwhile, the French are marching on some of the outlying Prussian fortifications, and General Soubise strikes and destroys the garrison at Minden. Frederick returns to Prague, and destroys the Austrian again in what I will call the Second Battle of Prague. And so ends the spring of 1757. Turn 5. This is the summer of 1757. So on the event table, Poland revolts. Since Poland is still neutral, then nothing really happens, so we're going to assume there's some sort of internal conflict that happened in Poland. Both the Prussians and the Austrians decide to work the diplomatic tables. The Prussians are going to put an effort against France, but has no effect. The Austrians focus on diplomacy with Russia, also to no effect. So we're going to go into the campaigning, and General Seydlitz decides to march. He leaves the General Lowald behind in Glatz. Also, the Russians under Apraksin march into Moravia. Ferdinand leads his army also to launch an attack against Torgau. The French, too, are on the march. General Soubise moves to Stade, where he assaults the Hanoverian fortress, and that capitulates to him. Then Richelieu marches to the vicinity of Minden, and another French army marches upon Frankfurt. Then Ferdinand launches a siege against Torgau. He manages a breach and opens a formal siege, and this fortress does fall to the Hanoverians. Then General Seydlitz conducts a formal siege against the Saxons at Pirna. He also gains a breach and then launches an assault, and that assault destroys the defenders. So Pirna is now captured by the Prussian army. Finally, the Russian army is threatening the Austrian fortress at Brunn. So the French at this stage have captured major positions in Hanover, and the Russian army is threatening the Austrians. At this point in the game, the balance of power is -2 in favor of the Prussians. However, this is still within the neutral range on the chart, and this will bring the turn to a conclusion. So now we go to the fall of 1757. The British public opinion event is rolled on the events table, and since the balance of power is neutral, there's really not much effect this time. Both sides do invest in diplomatic action, as we would expect, and as a result, France and Britain both become neutral. So that's kind of a surprise. Then we go to the campaigning. Ferdinand marches the army of Hanover to Dornitz. Praxin continues his siege at Brunn, and his battery achieves a breach, and the Russians then are able to assault. And however, the battle dissolves into a draw. Then General Seydlitz lays siege to Dresden. Again, he gets a breach, and then an assault, and this time he wins. It's a Prussian victory, but the Saxon garrison continues to hold the fortress, so it's not over yet. We go into a second impulse, and Ferdinand gets a no-march result, so he remains in place at Dornitz. General Praxin continues his siege and wins a tactical victory, although the Austrians do remain in control of the fortress. General Seydlitz gets another breach in the fortress at Dresden, and this time the remaining Saxon troops surrender. So we see the Russian forces continue to attack at Brunn, which continues to hold out during the third impulse. Now the balance of power has, with all of these successes, Prussian successes, the balance of power is now at -4. So that is not neutral anymore. This is mildly in favor of the Prussian coalition. Now we go into the winter of 757. This is the last turn of the scenario. So we roll for the event, and what we get is the coalition recruits. So General Braun adds a guard infantry in Vienna. Then we go into the diplomatic phase, and Russia becomes neutral, which is going to end its assault against the Austrians at Brunn. I'm imagining the Russians are frustrated by their failure to capture the fortress. The Prussians' diplomatic actions precipitate an incident, so that's going to, something happened. We don't know what it was, but it lowered the balance of power by a point. Now, this is the turn that the scenario ends on, as I mentioned. If we had played the campaign game, it would go all the way through to 1763. Since this is a winter turn, neither side really wants to do that much. The Austrian player sees it as very little worth taking any risks at this point, and it's really better to hold on as times and seasons change. The Prussian commander has enough points to claim a national victory at this early stage, so he's just going to sit still just to react to anything that the Austrians would attempt. And here I'll give you a little bit of an overview of the map at the end of the scenario. So this is bringing a close to the game. I'll have something to say about it in a very short overview in another video. Have a great day.